The SEC had no teams that went undefeated or had only one or two losses this season, which is the first time since 2000 that has happened. I think you can attribute that to a couple different things. I think Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference has made it that much more difficult. And I also think that you are seeing an improved out of conference schedule. The SEC is not necessarily known for really tough out of conference games traditionally, but I feel like there has been a push the last 4 or 5 years to really strengthen up that out of conference schedule. And I think that kind of bit some teams in the butt a little bit. Florida plays Florida State every single year. This year, obviously, wasn't necessarily a challenging team, but in most years, Florida State is better than most teams out of conference opponents, I would argue. They played Miami this year, who obviously we just finished talking about, won 10 games on the season, beat Florida at home, so that's a loss. They also played UCF, who they took care of business against, but in previous years potentially was going to be a tough game. Do you think that the SEC is going to potentially reconsider their out of conference scheduling you know path moving
No,
forward?
I don't think so. Because I don't think the out of conference schedule was what bit anybody in the butt. I think it was the in conference schedule that bit
Yeah.
everybody in the butt.
Yeah, I mean, I think the
The
in-conference
problem to
schedule
me
is more to
wasn't the out
blame,
of
but you can
conference.
control the out of
You
conference.
can control the in conference too, though. And that's why I think they won't go to 9 games like the Big Ten
Oh, they
does,
were
like the Big
not going
12
to
does.
9 games. For sure, they're
That's
not
to
going to
me
9
the
games.
the out of conference is sort of it sounds good, but nobody's playing like that tough of out of conference games where it's knocking them out of anything. Like it was crazy to me that Greg Byrne was going on this big rampage about out of conference wins and losses when they played Mercer, USF, and Wisconsin. And I'm just like, dude, what are we doing here, right? Like you blew all of these teams out. None of them were competitive. Why are we complaining about out of conference games? Lane
Yeah.
Kiffin doing kind of the same thing. Like we're going to complain about out of conference scheduling, and they're playing just absolutely terrible out of conference
Yeah.
teams. And
Yeah.
so if out of conference games had cost some of these teams playoff spots, then I
Yeah.
think you would see some changes. But I mean, for all intent and purposes, yeah, if Georgia and Ohio State play, yeah, that's a tough out of conference game, right? Like that, that could knock you out of something if you didn't take care of business in the conference later. But I don't
I
think
mean,
that's ever.
Texas A&M and M and Notre Dame, that, I don't
I mean,
Texas A&M
yeah, A&M
had
was a
3
7-5
losses,
team,
so
yeah, or 8-4 team. So I just
yeah.
I don't know how much it matters, but you know, I don't think those are the kind of games that are knocking people out of championships or
Okay, so
playoffs or
maybe
anything else
not
like
this
that.
year, but that doesn't mean that they're not seeing that down the road in the future. I think if the SEC is looking and they got 3 teams in this year, and maybe they were expecting to get 4 and they didn't. Maybe they're expecting that Alabama team to sneak in there or that South Carolina team or Ole Miss. I'm not saying that the out of conference knocked anybody out this year, but I can see a scenario where you rethink down the road because you're thinking, okay, they are not giving us the benefit of the doubt. Big Ten got 4 teams in. We only got 3. Um, Maybe we need to ensure that we aren't going to have that one loss that keeps us out from out of conference. And we already play the toughest schedules with or without opening at Michigan or opening LSU opening with Florida State or Florida opening with Miami or whatever. Like maybe we'll eliminate that one landmine that could at some point affect
I
whether
mean,
or
I
not it's
hope not. Do you hear how chicken shit what you're saying sounds? I hope not. I hope that the
their
conference
schedules are
No, no, no,
already
no. Hold on, hold
determined
on. Hold on.
anyway, is
I
the
hope that
point.
the conference I hope that the conference that has beat their chest about being better than anybody, being able to play anybody, being able to take anybody on, and then has an out of conference record that is better than anyone else's. Like, let's be fair. Like the SEC's got out of conference record, if you take out bowl games, is still the best.
Mhm.
I would hope that just because they can't beat each other in conference, they don't stop scheduling out of conference
It's not
later.
that they can't beat each other in conferences, that they are better than most conferences. So they are seeing a tougher opponent week in and week out than pretty much everybody else.
And
So,
they've done that the last 20 years.
and
So
they
because it
have.
bit them,
So you either
so
reward it
why would
with
they change it now?
because if it's not being rewarded in the method that they're using to determine playoff teams, then it becomes a hindrance.
Who was
They're
not rewarded?
still play.
Who was not rewarded for that?
I mean, you could argue that Alabama, South Carolina,
Who did
or
Alabama
Ole
play out
Miss
of
all
conference?
could have been in. No, you're missing
Alabama.
my point. It's not about you're missing my point. My point is not that an out of conference schedule kept anybody out this year. It's that the fact that the SEC beats up on each other week in and week out and is a tougher top to bottom conference than anybody else, and it doesn't appear that that was acknowledged when determining who was in. The SEC got 3 teams in, the Big 10 got 4 teams in. I think that you could argue that Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina all could have done a better job in round 1 uh, than some of the teams that were let in. But my point is, okay, they're not going to treat us as the toughest conference that we are. Maybe we need to change our strategy moving down the line, because if they're not going to acknowledge it, why continue to schedule it?
I mean, I would hope they don't do that, because I hope you listen back to this and hear that logic out loud. You could also just beat teams as a double-digit favorite when they are in conference. You know,
Listen,
like
I
I get it. I get the idea. I guess the logic of this. But the other thing is, Alabama's like future opponents are scheduled out through like 2030, and Greg Byrne had all of these things to say about, oh, maybe we'll reconsider. And guess how many cancellations have happened from SEC future schedules? Do you want to take a wild guess?
I mean, Florida has had multiple cancellations in the past 2
None
years.
on none on their side. And I
Not
mean,
big
I'm talking about teams that are in the playoffs. So I'm not talking about bottom
Yeah,
feeders.
probably none, right?
No, and so like I just think it just sounds good. Like it just sound we need to change up the way that we schedule if this is going to happen. It just sounds good. Like nobody's changing anything up. Also, these ADs, like no, Alabama has a home and home with Florida State these next couple of years. They've got one with Notre Dame coming up. You think they're losing that revenue? You think these ADs really are going to do that? You know, because we talk about like the $1 million they might split if they make the national championship compared to the weekend revenue that comes in from Notre Dame coming or Florida State coming. Like these teams, come on. It's just hot air. They're not doing it. You don't even really, I know you're saying all this, but you don't even really believe they'll do it, do you?
No. Oh, I don't necessarily believe that they'll do it, but I understand the idea. And I think that this concept of what is the SEC record in the bowl game is such bullshit, honestly. Like you have so many kids that opt out. None of that. The argument isn't in one-on-one in a bowl when we're missing half of our team, how does the SEC fare against everybody else? What it actually is week in and week out, the top to bottom of the SEC is stronger than any other conference. If you look at teams 6 through 14, those teams are stronger than anybody else's 6 through 14, which is kind of the point, right? I think the SEC is a tick weaker this conference, or excuse me, this season than they've been in a long time. And I think NIL has to do with that. I think that a guy that maybe would have sat on the bench for 2 years at Georgia and then become a starter is now starting at Missouri, right? So that made maybe the second tier and third tier programs elevated the teeniest bit, and it knocked the very top tier down a tiny peg, right? But in general, the middle to bottom of the SEC is stronger than any middle to bottom of any conference in college football. Tell me that's wrong.
No, I don't think that's wrong at all. We don't disagree. We don't disagree on any of this outside of the fact that canceling out of conference games would be lunacy. Yeah. Like that's the only thing we disagree. I agree on everything. I just think it would be crazy to cancel a game. I think it'd be crazy to cancel the games because of what might happen. You know, we might look at the schedules. We might look at the schedules going forward, and that might keep us out. So we better preemptively cancel them. Like that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know that a 9-3 in the SEC is not the same as a 9-3 anywhere else. And so
I've never heard anyone argue that it was.
Well, we got somebody arguing in our comments right this minute that there is, but
I mean, a 9-3 in the SEC is not the same as 9-3 anywhere else.
The point is, though, is that if then that team that a 9-3 in the SEC should be getting that nod is kind of the point.
I mean,
and if they don't, do you evaluate your strategy moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to. I mean, and this goes back to the playoff conversation. It's very difficult to evaluate 9-3 versus 11-1. And that's a very hard thing to ask a committee to do because we all have our opinions on what would happen and who would win this. And why this team would be favored over this one. But to me, that's a really hard thing to evaluate. 9-3 against a really good record or schedule versus 11-1 against kind of a trash schedule. I don't
It is.
really know how you evaluate that,
You
especially when that 9-3 team lost as a double-digit favorite and scored 3 points doing it, in norm. Like that, to me, that's what made it so tough on the committee
Yeah.
was because
Yeah.
how about this? I thought Miami's 10-2 was more impressive than Indiana's 11-1.
Yeah.
Just, pound for pound. But I mean,
Yeah.
how do you figure that? Like, so I don't know.
I don't know.
But
I think the
nobody's
Big Ten
canceling
is
any
a tougher
games.
conference than the ACC is, and so that would be a hard argument for me. But I also there is such inequity in the way that scheduling is happening now, even within conference. For the Big Ten, for a long time, there's been scheduling inequity. You'll have teams that play incredibly tough schedules, and you have teams that somehow dodge the top teams in the conference. It hasn't been like that in the SEC truly until this year when we added Texas and Oklahoma. I feel like there are some teams that had an easier path. Like Missouri should have been able to trip and go 10-2, right? Like their schedule this year was one of the easier in the conference. But I do think scheduling parity within your own conference is important and something that all of these conferences could work on. And maybe that helps the overall picture as well. I don't know because is Indiana 11-1 if they played a tougher in conference draw, right?
Yeah. The other thing too about this that I mean I've said this before, and so not to bring something else up, this argument would hold more weight if Alabama had lost to the good teams on their schedule.
Yeah. Well, Alabama
So
losing to Oklahoma is like
yeah, it's
crushed there,
hard for
even
me
though
to.
I
Do I think that Alabama would have been favored against Indiana? Yes, I do.
yeah.
If Alabama had lost to Georgia instead of Oklahoma, I think they actually would have gotten in.
Yeah.
Like that'd have been a really good
Yeah.
loss. It was early in the season. People kind of forget about it. They could have played their way
Yeah.
back. The problem was you can't tout like, oh, we play the best of the best of the best of the best, and then lose to the
Yeah.
bad
I
teams.
agree.
Like that to me,
I agree.
that's where the struggle was. That's what made
Yeah.
it tough for people
Yeah.
to wrap their minds around.
Yeah. And I think that that's definitely has carries some weight. I think, I hope moving forward, we're looking at not just what is your record, but who did you beat? And I understand the concept of you can't help the conference that you're in and you got to play the teams on your schedule from your conference. I get that to an extent, but who did you beat? If there is a team that beat multiple ranked opponents, but maybe has one more loss than a team who doesn't have any ranked wins, I think that should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I agree. I think who you beat, how that looks. I don't think it should just be ranking wins and losses. And I think that Alabama gets in over
Yeah.
Indiana if they don't lose to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But losing to
Yeah.
Oklahoma late was kind of the thing that set them up.
The dagger in the heart.
They
Well,
couldn't do that.
it'll be interesting to watch, and this is going to be, you know, what second year in a row that the SEC doesn't have a team in the national championship. But I want to say the stat is that they've won 14 of the last 18. So, the dominance is still there, whether or not they win
Don't turn into Miami
this
fans
year.
now.
But
Don't
don't
turn
turn.
into
Oh,
Miami fans.
I'm gonna ignite
Don't
the
be doing the
Ohio
past
State
stuff.
fans.
Don't. We live for the future. We live for the now.
Wait till
That's
they know
what
that
the
Urban
Bible
Moore's
says.
has been wearing Gator
Forget
shirts.
about yesterday. It'll be interesting to see if they can get a team in the championship next year.
Yeah.
There's a partial ACC team there this year. So, anyway, all right, wrap
Okay,
this
you're
thing
gonna
up.
count
Good luck,
Notre
good
Dame
luck.
now. Thanks so much for watching this clip from our live show of a peek inside SEC football. If you enjoyed this content and would like to support, we'd love to have you subscribe. We are live every Sunday evening, and we'll be back for another episode soon.